to start this morning with a little feedback, a little discussion about our field tour yesterday, which was excellent. I really enjoyed that myself. I'm not a cover crop guy, so to speak, but I learned a lot, and I was impressed with what's going over there at the Beltsville Agricultural Station. So the way I was thinking about taking this session was to break it really into two parts. One would be to get your questions answered if you didn't have any questions answered yesterday, or you have some new questions that you thought of. We have some of the presenters that are here and other people who might be able to answer those questions. Well, then there's also another part I'd like to have is to get some feedback. So that would be, now that you've been stimulated by seeing all the field activities and the research activities and equipment that we saw yesterday, we'd really like to get your feedback about the cover crop practices, technologies, varieties, and equipment that you might have some information to provide back to the speakers and to the researchers yesterday. The idea behind that session was not only to help you see things more clearly, but also to stimulate your thinking about what might be needed in the future. And those people we heard speak to us yesterday, they're the ones who are developing some of the newer ideas, both equipment and varieties, and research, such as Stephen Mirsky's research on what's needed in the future. But I thought it would be useful to have feedback to them also. And we will be sending thank you letters, obviously, to those people. So I can include comments or ideas that you have that you might think they might be useful for them, and I can include that in those thank you letters. So that's the second part of it. So we can start off with, I don't know if anybody, Jason has a microphone there, and anybody has any questions or even comments about the session yesterday, questions that you didn't get a chance to answer yesterday or ones you thought of since yesterday?
I really appreciated going to Beltsville and seeing long-term studies, and one of the aspects that I think that would be good to consider is incorporating livestock into cover crop practices and having a rotation that includes a pastoral component, and that's very difficult, and I know we're all focused on cash grain mentality and maximizing our profit, but I think that there's farming in the Northeast. There is mixed enterprise farms that do have livestock, but also either raise vegetables or grain, and having that included is something to consider.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. So I guess, Stephen, you better expand that experiment you have out there. Huh? But no, it is. I mean, I'm joking about Stephen. He's got such a great experiment. But you're right that livestock is a major component in the Northeast when you're talking about many of our farms. And that's where a large part of the income actually comes from.
I don't know if the person's here that was rolling down the large amount of rye, and then plant grain crops into it. But I was wondering, do they have to do additional nitrogen applications due to the maturity of that rye? And, that will tie up a great deal of nitrogen in that decomposition stage. Is there additional nitrogen having to be put up front than what you would in a less mature cover crop?
I'm not sure who the best person to answer that is. I am a nitrogen guy, but that's not my narrow area of expertise. I don't know, Stephen, or is Steve Groff here, or Stephen Mirsky might want to answer that?
As the rye matures and you're working with this really high carbon rich product, that's going to tie up a bunch of nitrogen. So, we find when you're just killing it in the tillering phase or even the stem elongation phase where it's just starting to get going, your typical fertility programs are compensating. But as you start to get into that really big, heavy rye cover crops, if you're not going into it with a legume like soybeans, if you're going into it with corn, you're probably going to need to change those starter rates. And that's something that I advocated in the talk I gave yesterday, where we don't have that well defined. That's one of the things I think the fertility programs need to be doing, is doing a complete factorial look at starter and side dress split application rates into these higher cover crop residues, because we find that we need to change that. So we've been just doing that. We haven't tested it well, but we've been bumping up to moving from a, like, for example, if we're in a 30-120 split, we've been going now to a 50-100 split just to compensate for that. But that's not been well documented.
Stephen, you did a great job there. I want to emphasize, though, what he said has to be followed. When you're going into rye, cereal rye, boot stage or more, assume there is 0 nitrogen available for the first couple weeks. I may be exaggerating a little bit, but it means a point. That rye is doing its thing. It's taking up the N, and that's a good thing. But you have to understand, we're growing the corn, so you need the nitrogen at planting, either in a start or in the furrow or close by the seed, very close by the seed. It's a total different story when you're going into other cover crops like a legume or a radish, where you don't usually maybe need any nitrogen on the planter, so to speak. So you have to understand that dynamic, and that's where a lot of people kind of screw up. I think they don't understand that you need to have it right close to the corn when you're going into something like cereal rye. A lot of times they accuse it of being allelopathy. I think allelopathy is used too often. I think it's more a lack of nitrogen immediately. That's personal philosophy there. But I, for myself, when I'm planting into tall cereal rye, I want to have some form of nitrogen on that seed. Very, very little. But I run it through, I have a totally tubular system which puts it right in the furrow. You can't be much, very little, and then some really close by. Now, the only exception to this is if you're like Charlie Martin, he spreads a lot of manure year after year after year after year, so he has a little bit more of a pool of available nitrogen even in the context of rye, but he's an exception. And you got to understand that when you see some people's operations, what is the background and the history of that field? Because if you go in a field that has no manure history and so forth, and you grow a good crop of cereal rye, there won't be any nitrogen there at that time. So you see there's a little bit of nuances with this, and you have to understand that from Charlie Martin's perspective. He's starting with a high-class soil that has nitrogen that's starting to mineralize down, because I wouldn't say he has 0 nitrogen in his situation. But more than not, assume there's 0 nitrogen at that point. Make sure you have it there if you're doing the cereal rye.
So I would just like to follow up. In New York, we discourage the practice of planting corn into cereal rye, at least for the organic producers. And we really are looking for drawing down on nitrogen for soybean weed suppression. And so we say, don't plant, no-till plant organic corn into rolled rye. If you want to do organic no-till, just go with the soybean in rolled rye. And so that seems to work really well with us. And again, part of the weed suppression that we're getting is because of that low nitrogen, and we're giving that soybean a competitive advantage over the weeds. So that's just something else to consider, especially for organic producers that don't have all of those options. So.
Yeah, I actually have my own question on follow-up on that. If that rye is young and you're putting it down green, does it really tie up very much? It's 4% nitrogen, maybe 5% nitrogen. And I actually guess if you had a huge rye cover crop at this time of year and you were in no manure situation, that probably a good indication you over fertilized.
Thank you. Lots of there's a great knowledge bank here today, so thank you everyone for your input. I wanted to ask a question if anyone has been working on utilizing species that are adapted to low pH soils. That's one of the issues that we're trying to solve, so I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that.
I don't know, we don't have, Chris Rehberg Horton's not here, I guess. He's going to come in later. I don't know, Stephen, you might be the only one with a little knowledge on the breed. Is Ramona here? She's not here, I guess. Looking at low pH soils for breeding of cover crops.
The breeding program that we have in place right now that you saw in the fields, the primary targets are winter hardiness, early growth rates, and removing hard seed and hairy vetch, and biological end fixation. So those are the primary traits that we're targeting early on. There are others that we're looking at as we get down the road, but We're kind of a team of agronomists, soil scientists, and breeders, and Chris and I are not the breeders. We're working with the breeders, and the one thing I've learned working with breeders the last couple of years is that you have to set a lot of, your goals have to be small, baby steps every step of the way. So, every time you add another trait, that's a whole body of work. So the pH is certainly an interesting one, but not on the radar right now.
One of the things you want to consider with that, we do have like Alsike clover, tobacco grows well at a low pH, and you could look at some species that grow adequate at a lower pH, but the problem is I really think you need to look at your pH system in the soil, because from a microbial point of view, the microbes don't function as well in an acidic soil. If you have the bacteria, rhizobium, isn't going to fix nitrogen at a real low pH. So you want to really look at raising that pH for a number of factors, from a biological point of view, and then from the soil chemistry, soil solution point of view, more of your major nutrients are available at a close to neutral pH or just slightly acidic pH. So, we try to adjust, look at species that will grow in a lower pH. But
yeah, I'm a blueberry grower in South Jersey, and a lot of our soils in our fields are around 3.5 to 4.5, which is something most crops don't grow in. So what we're trying to do is find ways to improve organic matter and, like Nick said, add some biomass into our soil. So for blueberry growers, cover crops is not even thought of. It's totally new for us. So.
But there is interest, though, evidently.
Yeah, the issue is a lot of the farms, especially blueberry farms in South Jersey, have been planted for close to 60, 70 years. So as a whole, most growers are seeing their fields, their yields decreasing rapidly. And kind of the thing that we're looking towards is cover crops. But being as we're limited with our very, very acidic pH, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered for us in particular. So
maybe you ought to take the soil solution, strain out the aluminum, and sell it. Maybe it's gonna be a lot there.
yeah. But we've done a few experiments and planting rye and sorghum, and in most cases it's a fail, just due to the fact that the pH is so low. So
yeah. My guess is you might have to push that pH up.
I know in one of the groups yesterday, the question was, is it possible to use a living cover crop? I think it was to incorporate, to use as or have qualified as incorporation, using your cover crop for your manure management and things like that. And I think the definition was living incorporation kind of thing, I think. So I was just seeing if that's a possibility.
Yeah, so I was curious about the vegetable growers, whether you had any feedback to the researchers. Obviously the blueberries, I hadn't thought about them actually. But when you look at most of the research, it's naturally concentrated a little more on the grain crops, the agronomic crops, just because that's where the acreage is. But vegetable growers really seem to have a lot more interest in many ways, because their soils need the cover crops more than the agronomic crops oftentimes. And yet, we could use some feedback, I think, to the researchers on vegetable systems.
This is Katie Campbell-Nelson. I'm the vegetable specialist from UMass. And I guess my feedback isn't necessarily, I don't think you guys need it. You've got plenty of research going on. But we could do some of our own. So I've definitely gotten some great ideas here about how to run trials in our own state to help vegetable producers, even though it's a different system. So, yeah, any other vegetable growers input would be great.
I'll just add, my name is Chuck Moore, and I'm the East New York Commercial Horticulture Program vegetable specialist. We cover 18 counties. So I've been doing a lot of reduced tillage work over the last 10 years, no-till before that. And the take-home message that I got pretty much is a lot of this is related to grains, but for sweet corn and some other veg crops, our window's a lot narrower, I think, in terms of like sweet corn. You're looking at a plant that we're looking to harvest in 70 days. So when we look at things of release of nitrogen and whatnot, we tend to need it a little bit earlier. With that said, we also, I think, have some of the greatest opportunities to get cover crops in. And so this whole meeting has been quite exciting, and hopefully we're going to take a lot of this information home and try to get it disseminated a little bit better. So thank you.
What I see in the vegetables is a huge opportunity because there's so many shorter season crops going in and out of the field, but they also greatly complicates it for the same reason.
Yesterday, Paul Peckham from Seedway Vegetable Seed, and I cover New England and parts of eastern New York and Long Island. Looking at that, I think it was the Penn State cedar. Yesterday.
The inner cedar.
Yeah.
Is that microphone on?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I saw an opportunity there for incorporating cover crop into cabbage, especially in the Connecticut Valley. Possibly even Brussels sprouts.
Oh, we're in vegetables as well. And one of the biggest things is we're kind of wanting to experiment with a cover crop next to the plastic, because what happens, you'll get so many weeds in that area that it will overshadow the ones that are on plastic. I was fascinated with the demonstration with the roller there, that it could almost be used, maybe 2 of those units as you plant it along. That I like seeing that smaller one, so that would work better for vegetables, I think.
Kind of a direct answer to you. Some people up in Vermont are experimenting with black plastic, and they're just putting annual rye on. Is it in between the plastic, but right on that edge where the plastic? You can just put annual rye, and people are just weed whacking it, and they're trying to keep it down to a dull roar. But yeah, well, between the black plastic, there's a lot of great ideas, but if you're going to pull that plastic up, you don't want to have anything too perennial and too. You got enough problems with crabgrass and everything else.
I'm a vegetable grower too from New Hampshire, and we've been working on a lot of these issues individually and collectively among the farmers. But I think one of the most exciting things to me is actually seeing the grain and corn stuff, which I'm very unfamiliar with. In New Hampshire, you could put all the vegetable growers in this room, and the total acreage would amount to about twice as much as what my brother-in-law crops. So the big impact that cover crops need to be done in, I think, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine is really the biggest impact we can have is reaching out to the dairy farmers who, as we all know, are getting a very low price for their commodity and have a hard time looking at this. I would dearly love to take Charlie Martin and Steve Groff on a road tour up there, have a couple of guys that actually do this, can talk about why they do it, the economics behind it. I don't know it. I think, historically, people who grow vegetables have been the hippies in the room in the Northeast, and we don't have a lot of credibility. But a lot of this technology that we're seeing, this is very doable. I mean, even I can understand it, and I can see how it relate. And, I think my whole familiarity for cover cropping for dairy farmers really had to do with reduced tillage, minimum tillage, and that was about it. So I'm sort of seeing that the focus for us really is to go back and try to impact the people who have the most bare ground in December.
Yeah, that was actually one of the purposes of this workshop, was to inform you of who does have the expertise and equipment or whatever you think you might need.